Why was no one looking at her? The air tasted like dust, like burnt powder and dry earth. It shimmered above the ground, making the distant targets blur and dance in the heat. She lay there, pressed flat against the dirt, feeling the weight of the rifle against her cheek. Cool metal, steady, real. Gunnery Sergeant Anna Sharma didn't move. Not an inch. Her breathing was so slow, so measured that if you didn't know better, you'd think she wasn't breathing at all. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. Between each breath, between each heartbeat, there was a space. A perfect moment of stillness. That's where the shot lived. Through her scope, the world became smaller, clearer. A perfect circle of magnified glass where everything made sense. Physics, mathematics, wind speed, temperature, humidity, variables that could be solved. The distant target, a black silhouette 1,500 meters away, was just another problem waiting for an answer. Her spotter shifted beside her. Young Corporal Jensen. Nervous energy rolling off him in waves. Winds shifting, gunny, he whispered. Pushing 2 miles per hour, variable from 2 o'clock. She said nothing. Didn't need to, she'd already felt it. That whisper of air on the back of her neck, carrying the smell of sagebrush and rain that would never fall. Her fingers moved, barely visible, adjusting the windage knob. 1/10 of a mil. Click. It was a language spoken without words, a conversation between her and the rifle and the bullet that hadn't yet left the chamber. Then the voice came, loud, jarring, shattering everything. Look at her playing sniper. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, but inside something tightened, that familiar feeling, here we go again. Sergeant First Class Drake. She'd seen him before. Army Special Forces, attached for joint training. Swagger in every step, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown. The kind of man who believed his reputation arrived before he did. The kind who needed you to know he was in the room. You think this is some video game, Sharma? His voice carried across the range, loud enough for everyone to hear. That was the point, wasn't it? To make sure there was an audience. He stopped directly behind her position. His shadow fell across her back, across the rifle, across everything, like he was trying to block out the sun itself. We're running drills, Sergeant. Jensen's voice was tight, professional, but she could hear the tension underneath. Gunny's just getting her dope for the 1,500-meter target. Drake laughed, a harsh, grating sound that scraped against the quiet of the range. 1,500, with this crosswind, she'll be lucky to hit the berm. This isn't some cushy signals intelligence gig, sweetheart. This is about sending lead downrange. Real-world stuff. You wouldn't get it. Sweetheart. The word hung in the air like smoke, like something toxic you couldn't quite wash off. Sharma remained motionless, her focus absolute. She processed his words the way she processed wind, temperature, barometric pressure. Another environmental factor, a source of turbulence to be accounted for and then discarded. Her job was to solve the equation of the shot. His mockery was just noise, irrelevant data. But somewhere deeper, in a place she didn't let herself examine too closely, she felt it. That old familiar weight, the assumption, the dismissal, the casual certainty that she didn't belong here, that she couldn't do this, that she was playing dress-up in a world built for men like him. You hear me, Sharma? Drake pressed forward, nudging her gear bag with the toe of his boot. Physical now, crossing that line. Or are you too busy calculating the perfect Instagram filter for your little rifle selfie? Behind him, his teammates chuckled. The sound rippled down the firing line like a wave of casual condescension. The other Marine shooters tensed. She could feel it without seeing them, but no one spoke. Drake was senior. And in the complicated hierarchy of a joint task force, inter-service friction was something you avoided. So she was alone in this, again. Sharma finally exhaled, a slow, controlled release of air that seemed to take all the tension of the moment with it. She did not turn. She did not raise her voice. When she spoke, her tone was as flat and calm as a still lake before dawn. Corporal Jensen, log the atmospheric conditions. Jensen straightened slightly, understanding immediately. Yes, gunny. Temperature 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure 29.92 inches of mercury and falling. Humidity 12%. Wind 2 miles per hour gusting to 3 from 2 o'clock. Logging, Jensen replied, his fingers moving across his data tablet. His voice had changed. Steadier now. He'd found his footing by following hers. Drake scoffed. Look at this. She's got a hole with her station out here. Honey, you point, you shoot. It's not that complicated. Honey. Without acknowledging him, without even the slightest indication she'd heard, Sharma spoke again. Target distance 1,570 meters. Coriolis effect. Calculate for latitude 34 degrees north. Spin drift. Right hand twist 1 in 10. Muzzle velocity 2,575 feet per second from this lot number. She paused, her finger resting on the trigger, the rifle an extension of her body, her mind, her will. Ready. Jensen watched his tablet, double-checking the calculations she'd already done in her head. Data is set. Send it. There was a moment then, a perfect moment of absolute stillness. The world held its breath. Sharma's finger squeezed, not pulled, not jerked, squeezed, gentle pressure increasing until the mechanical break point was reached and the firing pin released. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a controlled, violent push. The report was a sharp crack that echoed across the valley, bouncing off distant hills and fading into silence. For a long second there was nothing. Just the whisper-thin sound of the bullet's flight, too faint for most to hear, but she heard it. She always heard it. Then from across the expanse, from 1,500 meters away, a tiny sound returned. Tink. Metallic clear, unmistakable. Impact, Jensen called out, and she could hear the grin breaking across his face even though she couldn't see it. Dead center mass. Drake's laughter died in his throat. She could feel him behind her, squinting toward the distant target, trying to make sense of what he'd just witnessed with his naked eye. Fluke, he grunted. The word came out strangled, unwilling to concede. A lucky shot. The wind probably died down for a second. Sharma said nothing. She worked the bolt on her rifle with fluid, economical movements. Eject chamber lock. Her eye never left the scope. She took another slow, measured breath, letting her heart rate settle back to its resting rhythm. The entire process was a ritual of precision, a mechanical meditation that had been burned into her muscle memory through 10,000 repetitions. She adjusted her parallax, ensuring the reticle and the target were on the same focal plane. The world was again reduced to that perfect, silent circle of glass. Everything beyond it ceased to exist. This time she didn't wait for Jensen to confirm the data. She already had it. She had the feel of the air, the weight of the moment, the solution to the equation written in the language of physics and patience. Another exhale, another gentle squeeze. The rifle cracked again, the sound identical to the first, a signature written in gunpowder and precision. Another long second of silence stretched across the range. Every man on that firing line was holding his breath now, watching, waiting. Tink. The sound was fainter this time, but just as clear, like a bell being struck in a distant cathedral. Jensen stared through his spotting scope, his mouth falling open. Impact, he whispered, then louder for the benefit of everyone watching, everyone who needed to hear it. Impact, right on top of the first one. It's a single hole, gunny. A hush fell over the firing line. The chuckles from Drake's team had vanished, replaced by a tense, uncertain silence. Men who'd been leaning back, arms crossed, cocky grins on their faces, were now leaning forward, watching her. Drake stood frozen. His face had gone from confident to confused to something else entirely. Disbelief. The kind that comes when your entire worldview shifts beneath your feet and you don't know where to put your weight anymore. He looked from the distant target back to the small, still form of the woman lying on the ground. She was already clearing her weapon, her movements unhurried, deliberate, like she just completed routine paperwork, not performed what most of these men would consider an impossible feat. Sharma pushed herself up, brushing the dust from her uniform with the same care she gave everything else. Methodical, thorough. She never once looked at Drake. Her gaze was fixed on her equipment as she carefully packed her rifle, treating her tools with the same quiet respect she gave her work. To her, the shots were not a performance. They were a problem that had been solved. Twice. The emotional component, the gallery of watching eyes, the weight of their judgment and surprise and grudging respect, all of it was irrelevant. She handed her logbook to Jensen, transcribed the data. I want a full ballistic profile worked up by 1700. Yes, gunnery sergeant, he said. His voice was different now, filled with a new kind of respect that hadn't been there an hour ago. Only then did she turn. Her eyes, cool and analytical, met Drake's for the first time. She offered no smile, no taunt, no flicker of triumph. Her expression was neutral, as if she were looking at a piece of malfunctioning equipment that wasn't worth the effort to repair. She gave him a slow, deliberate nod, a formal acknowledgement of his rank, nothing more, nothing less. And then she walked away, leaving him standing in a cloud of stunned silence and the lingering smell of gunpowder. The incident was over. For her, it was already data, logged and filed. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. What happens when silence becomes evidence? Later that evening, the harsh fluorescent lights of her small office hummed their monotonous tune. It was a sterile space, organized with the same precision she applied to everything else. Manuals stacked with their spines perfectly aligned. Cables routed at 90-degree angles. A place for everything and everything in its place. On her desk, a single monitor glowed in the dimness, displaying a simple text file. She sat down, her fingers moving across the keyboard with quiet efficiency. Date, she typed. The cursor blinked. Time 14:30 Zulu. Location, Range 4 Joint Training Facility. Personnel involved. Gunnery Sergeant A. Sharma, Corporal R. Jensen, Sergeant First Class M. Drake. Subject, unprofessional conduct and verbal harassment during live fire exercise. She recounted the events with detached accuracy. There was no emotion in her words, no hint of anger or indignation woven between the lines. It was a report, not a complaint. Just facts laid out in chronological order, each one documented with the same care she brought to calculating a firing solution. She listed Drake's exact phrases: playing sniper, cushy signals, intelligence gig. You wouldn't get it, Instagram filter. Each word was a data point, evidence to be archived. She documented his physical action of nudging her gear bag. She noted the presence of his team members as witnesses. She recorded the time, the temperature, the wind speed, everything. Then she opened a separate file, a video feed synced with audio. The footage was from a small, high-fidelity sensor she'd been testing, designed for real-time atmospheric analysis at the firing point. Its primary purpose was to collect data on mirage and heat shimmer, environmental factors that affected long-range shooting. But it also recorded everything else. Sound, movement, voices. She'd known it was there, had known it was running, had made no mention of it to anyone. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing at all. Just watch, just listen, just document. The video played on her screen, silent except for the hum of her computer fan. Drake's voice, loud and clear. Every word of mockery preserved in digital perfection. The nudge of her gear bag visible in the corner of the frame. The chuckles of his teammates. Then her own calm voice, listing atmospheric data like a pilot going through a pre-flight checklist. The two shots. The stunned silence afterward. She watched it once, then saved it, encrypted it, backed it up to 3 separate locations, each with timestamp verification and chain of custody documentation. She wasn't angry. That would require emotion, and emotion clouded judgment. She was simply prepared. Because she'd seen this before. Variations of the same pattern played out in different uniforms, different ranks, different locations. The assumption, the dismissal, the moment when competence was labeled as luck, when skill was explained away, when the narrative had to be rewritten to make sense of something that didn't fit the expected story. She knew what was coming next. She'd learned, over years of being the only woman in rooms full of men who thought they knew better, that documentation was the only defense that mattered. Words could be twisted, memories could be selective, but data didn't lie. She closed the files and sat back in her chair, staring at the blank wall across from her desk. In the reflection of her monitor, she could see her own face, tired, calm, resolved. There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she said. Master Gunnery Sergeant Torres stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He was old school, Vietnam era, the kind of Marine who'd seen everything and forgot nothing. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying her with those sharp, weathered eyes. "You handled that well today," he said. "Thank you, Master Guns." He nodded slowly. "Drake's going to make noise about it. You know that, right?" "I expect he will." Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he pushed off the wall, walked to her desk, and tapped the monitor with one thick finger. "You got everything documented?" "Yes, Master Guns." "Good." He straightened up. "Because in about 3 days, maybe 4, someone's going to try to turn this into your problem instead of his. They always do." She met his eyes. "I know." Torres smiled then. A thin, hard smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good. Then you're smarter than most." He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "For what it's worth, Gunny, those were clean shots. I've been doing this for 32 years. I've seen maybe 5 shooters who could pull that off in those conditions. You're one of them." He left before she could respond, the door clicking shut behind him. She sat alone in her office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt something she rarely let herself feel. Not pride, not vindication, something quieter, something harder to name. Maybe it was just the knowledge that she'd done her job, that she'd done it well, and that when the noise came, when the narrative started to shift and the story got rewritten, she'd be ready. 3 days later, Torres was proven right. How do you fight a lie that everyone wants to believe? The summons came via email, formal, terse. "Report to Captain Valerius's office at 0800. Subject, conduct inquiry." Sharma read it twice, her expression unchanged. She'd been expecting this. The only surprise was that it had taken 3 full days instead of Tor's predicted time frame. She arrived at 0755, precisely 5 minutes early as regulation required. Captain Valerius's office was in the headquarters building, second floor corner office with windows that looked out over the parade ground. A good view for a man who liked to watch his command from a comfortable distance. The door was open. She knocked twice on the frame. "Gunnery Sergeant Sharma, reporting as ordered, sir." Valerius looked up from his desk. He was mid-30s, academy graduate, infantry officer who'd done his time in the fleet before landing this staff position. The kind of officer who was more comfortable with spreadsheets than with troops. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Close the door and have a seat, Gunny." She closed the door, sat down, hands folded in her lap, back straight, waiting. Valerius shuffled some papers on his desk, not quite meeting her eyes. "I've received a complaint," he said finally. "A formal complaint. From Sergeant First Class Drake." "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone neutral, giving away nothing. "He alleges that you were insubordinate during a training exercise last week. That you ignored his instructions, showed disrespect to a senior NCO, and created a hostile training environment." She said nothing, just waited. "He also states," Valerius continued, and now he did look up at her, "that you intentionally showed off in front of his team to embarrass him. That the entire incident was, and I'm quoting here, a deliberate attempt to undermine his authority. The words hung in the air between them, each one carefully chosen, each one designed to reframe the narrative, to turn her competence into misconduct, her silence into insubordination. "Sir," she said carefully, "I filed my own report on that incident. I submitted it within 2 hours of the event." Valerius nodded. "I've read it," he paused. "It's very detailed." "Yes, sir. Perhaps too detailed." He leaned back in his chair. "Look, Gunny, I'm going to be frank with you. Sergeant Drake is a highly decorated Special Forces operator. He's been in combat. He's earned his reputation. And he feels that you deliberately tried to humiliate him in front of his men." She felt something cold settle in her chest. That familiar weight. Here it was, the choice that wasn't really a choice. Back down, apologize for being good at your job, smooth things over, or stand your ground and become the problem. "Sir," she said, her voice still calm, still professional, "I was conducting a routine training exercise. Sergeant Drake approached my position unsolicited and made several unprofessional comments. I did not respond to those comments. I simply completed my assigned task." Valerius sighed. "That's your version." "It's not a version, sir. It's what happened." The captain's jaw tightened. "That's the attitude I'm talking about, Gunny. You need to understand something. This isn't just about what happened on that range. It's about maintaining unit cohesion, about working together across service branches, about," he paused, searching for the words, "about not making waves." Making waves, the phrase echoed in her mind. Don't make waves. Don't cause problems. Don't be difficult. Don't, in other words, be too competent, too confident, too unwilling to accept being belittled. "Sir," she said, and now there was an edge to her voice, barely perceptible but there, "with respect, I did my job. If doing my job well is considered making waves, then I respectfully disagree with that characterization." Valerius's face flushed slightly. "Gunnery Sergeant, I'm trying to help you here. Drake is pushing for formal disciplinary action. I can make this go away quietly if you're willing to meet him halfway. Maybe draft a letter of apology for the misunderstanding. An apology for being insulted, for being harassed, for refusing to accept either." She looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. And she understood then with perfect clarity that he'd already made his decision. He wanted this to go away, yes, but not because he cared about the truth. He wanted it to go away because dealing with it, really dealing with it, would be uncomfortable, would require him to confront a popular, decorated operator, would require him to choose sides. And he'd already chosen. He just needed her to make it easy for him. "Sir," she said quietly, "I respectfully decline to apologize for conduct that was entirely professional." Valerius's expression hardened. "Then I don't have a choice, Gunny. I'm issuing you a letter of reprimand for conduct prejudicial to good order and discipline. It'll go in your record." The words landed like stones. A letter of reprimand, career poison. It would follow her through every promotion board, every assignment, every evaluation. It would become the story told about her, the mark that said, "Problem Marine." "Sir," she said, and her voice was still calm, but now it carried something else underneath. Something steel. "I request to elevate this matter to the next level of command." Valerius blinked. "That's not necessary." "With respect, sir, I believe it is. I have additional evidence that I believe the commanding officer should review before this matter is finalized." "What evidence?" His tone had shifted, suspicious now, uncertain. "Complete documentation of the incident, sir. Audio and visual. Full data set." She watched his face carefully, saw the moment the implication registered, saw the flicker of doubt cross his features. "You recorded the training exercise." "I was testing atmospheric sensor equipment, sir. The recording was incidental to that testing. But yes, the entire incident was captured." Valerius sat very still. For several seconds he said nothing. She could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, the risk assessment, the political math. Finally, he spoke. "I'll note your request in the record, Gunny, but my decision stands. You're dismissed." She stood, came to attention, her movements precise, controlled. "Yes, sir." She turned and walked out of his office, closing the door behind her with careful, measured pressure. In the hallway, she allowed herself one deep breath. Just one. Tors had been right. They always tried to make it her problem. But Tors had also taught her something else years ago when she'd first started dealing with situations like this. He'd said, "When the system fails, you don't give up. You escalate. You document. You force them to make their choice in the light, not in the shadows." She pulled out her phone and composed a brief email, addressed to the office of the base commander, Colonel David Evans. Subject line: Request for command review of disciplinary action. She hit send. And then she went back to work, because that's what Marines do. They carry on. They complete the mission, even when the mission is surviving, until someone with integrity decides to look at the evidence. Why does the truth take so long to matter? The days that followed were strange, quiet on the surface but humming with tension underneath. Word had spread through the base in that mysterious way military gossip travels, faster than official communications, more thorough than any briefing. The story being told depended on who was doing the telling. Drake's version: an arrogant Marine trying to show up a decorated Special Forces operator, a woman who couldn't take professional criticism, someone who needed to learn her place. The version among the Marines: one of their own being railroaded by an Army hotshot, a competent NCO being punished for embarrassing someone's ego, politics and inter-service rivalry at its worst. What neither version included was the full truth, because the full truth was still sitting on an encrypted drive, waiting for someone with the authority to actually look at it. Sharma went about her days with the same methodical calm she brought to everything: morning physical training, breakfast, work, more work. She ran her section with quiet efficiency, trained her Marines, completed her assigned tasks. She did not complain. She did not gossip. She did not offer her side of the story to anyone who asked, and plenty did ask. She simply said, "It's being handled through the proper channels." Jensen, her spotter, was less circumspect. The other junior Marines knew what had happened. They'd been there. They'd seen the shots. They'd heard Drake's words. And they were angry in the way young Marines get angry when they see something fundamentally unfair happening to someone they respect. "Master Guns," Jensen said one afternoon, cornering Tors near the armory, "this is bullshit. Everyone knows what Drake did. Everyone knows Gunny did nothing wrong." Tors fixed him with a hard stare. "You finished?" Jensen deflated slightly. "Yes, Master Guns." "Good." Tors' voice dropped to a low rumble. "Then here's what you're going to do. You're going to shut your mouth, do your job, and trust that the system works. Because if it doesn't work, if it turns out we're all just playing pretend at justice and integrity, then you knowing that truth isn't going to change anything except make you bitter. So shut up and stand by." "But Master Guns." "I said shut up, Marine." Tors' tone allowed no argument. "Your Gunny doesn't need you fighting her battles. She needs you being the professional she trained you to be. You understand?" "Yes, Master Guns." Tors softened slightly. "She's got this, trust me." But did she? Even Tors, for all his confidence, couldn't be sure. The military was an institution, and institutions protected themselves. They smoothed over inconvenient truths. They sacrificed pawns to maintain the integrity of the board. And Sharma knew this, had always known this. That's why she'd documented everything. That's why she'd encrypted her evidence. That's why she'd requested escalation to the base commander instead of just accepting Valerius's ruling. Because the only thing more powerful than institutional inertia was institutional embarrassment. And if she could force them to confront the truth, to look at the evidence in a context where ignoring it would be more embarrassing than addressing it, then maybe, just maybe, The system would work the way it was supposed to. 5 days after her meeting with Valerius, she received another email. This one from the base commander's office. Report to Colonel Evans, 0900 in dress uniform. Dress uniform. That was interesting. It meant this wasn't going to be a quiet conversation behind closed doors. It meant witnesses, formality, something official. She pressed her uniform that night with meticulous care. Every crease exactly where it should be, every ribbon in its proper place. Her shoes shined to a mirror finish. If she was going to be judged, if this was going to be the moment where the system either worked or failed, then she was going to show up looking like exactly what she was. A Marine, professional, prepared, unbreakable. The next morning she arrived at the headquarters building at 0845, 15 minutes early. She checked her uniform one last time in the reflection of a window, squared her shoulders, took a breath. Then she walked inside, up the stairs, down the hallway to Colonel Evans's office. The door was closed. She could hear voices inside, low, tense. She knocked twice, sharp and clear. "Enter." She opened the door and stepped inside, coming to attention. Gunnery Sergeant Sharma, reporting as ordered, sir. Colonel Evans sat behind his desk. Late 40s, combat infantry badge, silver star, the kind of officer who'd led from the front and carried the scars to prove it. His eyes were sharp, assessing, missing nothing. To his left stood Master Gunnery Sergeant Torres. To his right, Captain Valerius. And standing near the window, looking uncomfortable and trapped, was Sergeant First Class Drake. Everyone was in dress uniform. This was going to be formal, official, recorded. "At ease," Gunny Evans said. He gestured to an empty chair. "Have a seat." She sat, hands folded, back straight. Her face betrayed nothing. Evans picked up a paper from his desk. "I've been reviewing the documentation regarding an incident on Range 4, he said. His tone was neutral, careful. "I've read Sergeant Drake's complaint. I've read Captain Valerius's investigation and recommendation. And I've read your request for review along with your initial report." He set the paper down. "What I haven't seen yet is this additional evidence you mentioned to Captain Valerius." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small, encrypted data drive. "Sir, I have audio and visual documentation of the entire incident. The recording is time-stamped, encrypted, and has maintained chain of custody." Evans held out his hand. She stood, walked to his desk, and placed the drive in his palm. He plugged it into his computer. The room was silent except for the hum of the machine, the click of keys. Then the sound began, Drake's voice, loud and clear. "Playing sniper. You think this is some video game, Sharma?" Valerius's face went pale. Drake's jaw clenched. Torres remained expressionless, but she thought she saw the ghost of a satisfied smile at the corner of his mouth. The entire recording played out. Every word, every shot, the stunned silence afterward. When it ended, Evans let the quiet stretch out for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he turned to Drake. "Sergeant," he said, his voice dangerously soft, "3 days ago, in front of distinguished visitors, I heard you exclaim, and I quote, 'No one can hit that shot.' This was in reference to Gunnery Sergeant Sharma. Is that correct?" Drake swallowed hard. "Sir, it was an expression of surprise at the difficulty of the shot." "Was it?" Evans said. His voice dripped with sarcasm, "because it sounded remarkably similar to the sentiment you expressed on Range 4 last week. The sentiment that formed the basis of your formal complaint. You seem to have a recurring pattern of underestimating the gunnery sergeant's capabilities." He turned to Valerius. "And you, Captain, you accepted this complaint at face value. You conducted an investigation that consisted of taking one man's word over another's, and you issued a career-damaging letter of reprimand without any attempt at verification. Is this how you exercise command?" "Sir, I had sworn statements." "You had a narrative that fit your preconceptions," Evans snapped, "and you didn't dig any deeper. That is a failure of leadership." He finally turned to Sharma. She'd remained perfectly still throughout the exchange. Waiting. Gunnery Sergeant, Captain Valerius informed me that you requested to elevate this matter to me, but he denied it initially. He also mentioned you spoke of having complete data. Do you have anything you wish to present now? This was the moment. The institutional process was now calling for the proof she'd so patiently archived. Yes, sir. She'd already given him the drive. She'd already shown the evidence. But he was asking her to own it, to step forward and claim her vindication, to make it real in front of witnesses. Sir, she said, the recording speaks for itself. I filed my report in good faith. I requested proper review through the chain of command. I did my job. That's all I've ever tried to do. Evans nodded slowly. Then he stood up. His face was cold fury. Sergeant Drake, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You filed a false official report. You lied to a commissioned officer. You engaged in targeted harassment of a fellow service member. You have disgraced yourself and your uniform. He turned to Valerius. Captain, you failed to lead. You failed to investigate. You allowed your personal biases to cloud your judgment, and you punished a Marine for being competent. You have damaged the trust between the services in this task force. Evans sat back down. Master Gunnery Sergeant Torres, please escort Sergeant Drake to the legal office. He is to be confined to quarters pending charges. Torres nodded grimly, placing a firm hand on Drake's arm. The sergeant didn't resist. He looked broken. As he was led out, he glanced at Sharma one last time. His eyes held a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. She met his gaze without expression. With Drake gone, Evans picked up the letter of reprimand from his desk. He tore it in half, then tore it again, and dropped the pieces into his wastebasket. Gunnery Sergeant Sharma, he said, his tone now one of quiet respect. Your professionalism in this matter, from your restraint on the range to your meticulous documentation, is exemplary. I apologize for the command failure you experienced. Thank you, sir. One more thing. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small circular patch, black with a stylized phoenix embroidered in silver thread. In its claws, a lightning bolt and a key. I'm reassigning you, effective immediately. Your skills are wasted on routine qualifications. Welcome to the team. He handed her the patch. It was recognition, not just of her skill, but of her character. She took it, her fingers closing around the embroidered emblem. Yes, sir. What does vindication actually feel like? The next morning, Colonel Evans addressed the entire task force at morning formation. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying across the parade ground in the cold dawn air. He announced that Sergeant First Class Drake had been relieved of duties and would face disciplinary action for professional misconduct. He announced that Captain Valerius was being reassigned out of the task force. He spoke frankly about integrity, about trusting but verifying, about the danger of letting ego and prejudice undermine the mission. He didn't mention Sharma by name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. He spoke of an NCO who had faced unprofessional conduct and had responded not with emotion, but with overwhelming competence and unimpeachable proof. In this command, Evans concluded, his voice ringing with authority, we value performance, not reputation. We value truth, not volume. We reward competence. Period. After the formation dismissed, Master Gunnery Sergeant Torres approached Sharma. He held out his hand. In his palm was his own personal patch, a faded, worn Scout sniper insignia. I believe this belongs to one of our own, he said gruffly. It was the gesture of ultimate respect from the old warrior, the passing of something sacred from one generation to the next. Sharma looked at the patch, then at him. She reached up and removed the standard infantry patch from her own sleeve and handed it to him. They exchanged them without another word, a silent apology from the institution, a quiet acceptance. The culture was recalibrating. But here's what they don't tell you about vindication. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. There's no surge of triumph, no moment of pure satisfaction where everything feels suddenly right. Because the truth is, you shouldn't have had to fight this hard in the first place. You shouldn't have needed encrypted files and perfect documentation and a commanding officer willing to actually look at the evidence. You should have just been able to do your job. That evening, Sharma sat alone in her office, the same fluorescent lights humming overhead. On the sleeve of her uniform was the new Phoenix patch. On her monitor, a complex satellite overlay of a new area of operations, a place of shadows and signals, deep in hostile territory. Her next mission was already loading. She opened a new log file. The cursor blinked on the blank page. She typed a single entry for the events of the past week. Subject: Command Climate Issue Range 4. Status: Resolved. Correction achieved. She saved the file, closed it, turned her full attention to the map on the screen. The past was archived. The future was waiting. Because here's the thing about people like Sharma. They don't fight for vindication. They don't document everything because they want to win some battle or prove someone wrong. They do it because they believe, despite everything, despite all the times the system fails, that it should work, that it can work, that somewhere, buried under all the politics and ego and institutional inertia, there's still a core of integrity worth fighting for. And sometimes, just sometimes, they're right. Jensen found her there an hour later. He knocked on the doorframe. "Gunny, you got a minute?" She looked up. "What is it, Corporal?" He held out a data pad. "I finished that ballistic profile you wanted, from range 4, the shots." She took it, reviewed the data, nodded. "Good work, very thorough." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How did you know that it would work out, I mean, that someone would actually look at the evidence?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't. No, I mean, but I knew this. If I didn't document it, if I didn't push for review, then I would definitely lose. At least this way there was a chance." Jensen nodded slowly. "And if Colonel Evans had sided with Drake anyway? Then I would have filed a formal appeal. And if that didn't work, I would have requested a transfer. And if that didn't work," she paused, "I would have continued doing my job to the best of my ability, because that's all I can control." That seems, Jensen searched for the word, exhausting. Sharma smiled then. A small, tired smile it is. After he left, she sat in the quiet of her office and let herself feel the weight of the past week. The anger she hadn't allowed herself during the confrontation. The fear she'd pushed down when Valerius had issued that letter of reprimand. The loneliness of being the only one in the room willing to stand up and say, "No, this is wrong." But underneath all of that there was something else. Something that felt almost like peace. She'd done the right thing, the hard thing. She'd refused to apologize for being competent, refused to make herself smaller to make others comfortable, refused to accept that this was just how things were. And for once, just this once, the system had worked. Not because it was designed to, not because it naturally tended toward justice, but because she'd forced it to. Because she'd documented every second, prepared every piece of evidence, and refused to let the truth be buried under convenient narratives and comfortable lies. That was the real lesson, she thought. Not that the system works, but that sometimes, if you're willing to fight hard enough, if you're meticulous enough and patient enough and stubborn enough, you can make it work. It shouldn't be that way, but it was. And until it changed, until the system fixed itself, people like her would keep fighting, keep documenting, keep pushing. Because dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Does silence always mean surrender? 3 weeks later, Sharma found herself in a briefing room she'd never seen before. Windowless, secured. The kind of place where the walls didn't just keep sound in, they kept secrets locked tight. Around the table sat people she recognized by reputation, but had never worked with directly. The Phoenix patch crowd. The quiet professionals who didn't advertise what they did because what they did didn't make it into official records. Colonel Evans stood at the head of the table. "Welcome to the Special Reconnaissance Element," he said. His eyes swept across each face, landing briefly on Sharma. "You're here because you're the best at what you do. Period. I don't care about your service branch, your gender, your background. I care about results." He clicked a button. A satellite image appeared on the screen behind him. Mountainous terrain, remote, unforgiving. "We have a situation developing in this region," Evans continued. "High-value target, time-sensitive intelligence window. Standard approach won't work. We need precision. We need someone who can make an impossible shot in impossible conditions." He looked directly at Sharma. "Which is why Gunnery Sergeant Sharma is now our primary long-range asset for this operation." Around the table, heads nodded. No questions. No skepticism, just professional acceptance. These people didn't care about the drama that had played out on Range 4. They cared about whether she could deliver when it mattered. The briefing continued for 2 hours. Terrain analysis, weather patterns, infiltration routes, exfiltration contingencies. The kind of planning that assumed everything would go wrong and prepared for it anyway. When it ended, the others filed out. Sharma began gathering her notes. Evans approached her, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "You know why you're really here, Gunny?" She looked up. "Because I can make the shot, sir." "That's part of it," he said, "but there's something else." He paused. "In my experience, the people who document everything, who build unshakable cases, who refuse to bend when the system pressures them, those people don't just have integrity. They have discipline, real discipline. The kind that holds up under stress, under pressure, under conditions where most people break." He tapped the folder in her hands. "That's what I need on this team. Not just people who can shoot, people who can carry the weight of what comes after." She understood what he meant. The operations they ran, the shots they took, the decisions they made, all of it existed in a moral gray zone that could eat you alive if you let it. You needed people who could act decisively in the moment, then live with those actions afterward. People who could document everything, remember everything, and still sleep at night. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't." Evans straightened. "Mission brief is in 72 hours. Be ready." She was always ready. That night back in her quarters, Sharma sat on her bunk and looked at the phoenix patch on her sleeve. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, all the times she'd been dismissed, all the times she'd been told, directly or indirectly, that she didn't belong, all the times she could have backed down, apologized, made herself smaller. But she hadn't, because somewhere along the way she'd learned something essential. Your dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you carry within yourself, and no one can take it unless you hand it over. Drake had tried to take it, had tried to make her feel small, incompetent, out of place. And when she refused to accept that narrative, when she simply did her job and did it well, he tried to use the system against her. But the system, for all its flaws, had one redeeming quality. It respected evidence. It responded to truth, eventually, if you were patient enough and prepared enough to force it to look. She pulled out her personal laptop and opened a file she kept there. A running log of lessons learned, observations, thoughts, things she might one day teach younger Marines who would face the same challenges she had. She typed, "Lesson 47. Documentation isn't about being paranoid or distrustful. It's about respecting yourself enough to create a record of the truth. Because when someone tries to rewrite your story, the only defense that matters is proof." She typed, "Lesson 48. Competence is its own form of protest. When the world tells you that you don't belong, the most powerful response is to simply excel at what you do, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right." She typed, "Lesson 49. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She saved the file, closed the laptop, lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow there would be training, preparation. The mission was coming. A chance to do what she'd been trained to do, what she was best at, in an environment where the only thing that mattered was results. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of her quarters, she let herself acknowledge something she rarely allowed. She was tired, bone-deep tired, not from the physical demands of her job, but from the constant vigilance required just to exist in a world that seemed determined to question whether she belonged there. It was exhausting, being a woman in a male-dominated field, not because the work was harder, but because the work was never enough. You had to be twice as good to be considered half as competent. You had to document everything because your word alone wouldn't be believed. You had to remain calm and professional even when people treated you with contempt, because any emotional response would be used as proof that you couldn't handle the pressure. And the worst part, the absolute worst part was knowing that even when you did everything right, even when you had perfect evidence and overwhelming proof, there was no guarantee the system would protect you. You could do everything by the book and still lose, simply because the people in charge decided it was easier to sacrifice you than to confront uncomfortable truths. But you kept fighting anyway, because what was the alternative? Give up. Accept that this was just how things were. Let people like Drake define the limits of what you could achieve. No, never. Not while she had breath in her body and strength in her hands. She thought about the young Marines watching her, Corporal Jensen and others like him. The women coming up through the ranks who needed to see that it was possible, that you could stand your ground and survive, that competence and integrity still mattered. She thought about the moment Torres had handed her his scout sniper patch, the symbolic passing of knowledge from one generation to the next, the quiet acknowledgement that she'd earned her place, not through politics or favoritism, but through sheer, unwavering excellence. That mattered, that moment of recognition from someone who'd been doing this longer than she'd been alive. That quiet nod that said, "You're one of us now. You've proven yourself in the only way that truly counts." She closed her eyes and felt the weight of the Phoenix patch on her sleeve even though she'd taken off her uniform. It was more than a piece of cloth. It was a promise, a responsibility, a reminder that she carried the reputation of everyone who'd worn it before her and everyone who would wear it after. She would not fail them. 3 days later, she was on a helicopter flying toward the mountain she'd seen in the satellite imagery. The mission was live, real world, high stakes, the kind of operation where failure meant more than a bad evaluation. It meant lives lost, objectives unmet, consequences that rippled far beyond the individual. In the dim red light of the cabin, she checked her rifle for the dozenth time. The familiar weight, the textured grip, the scope she'd zeroed so many times she could do it in her sleep. This was who she was, not the woman who'd been harassed on Range 4, not the Marine who'd been unjustly reprimanded, not even the NCO who'd forced the system to correct itself. She was a gunner, a problem solver, someone who could look at an impossible shot and see only variables to be calculated, conditions to be accounted for, a solution waiting to be found. The helicopter banked hard, dropping fast toward the landing zone. Her heart rate remained steady, 58 beats per minute, the same calm rhythm she maintained on the range, in training, in every situation where others might panic. 30 seconds, the crew chief called out. She shouldered her pack, checked her harness one last time, made eye contact with the other operators on the team. They nodded to her, she nodded back. No words needed. They'd all read the reports. They all knew what she could do. The helicopter touched down. Ramp dropped. They moved out into the darkness, ghosts in the night, carrying with them the tools of their trade and the weight of their responsibility. And as Sharma melted into the shadows, her rifle in her hands, her team around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Pure focus, clear purpose. This was where she belonged, not in an office defending herself against false accusations, but out here in the field doing the work she'd been trained to do. The mission unfolded over 3 days. Insertion, movement, observation, waiting, and finally the moment. The shot, 1,800 meters in wind conditions that would make most shooters pack up and go home. But she'd calculated every variable, accounted for every factor, trusted her training and her equipment and that quiet voice inside that said, "You can make this shot." She exhaled, squeezed. The rifle barked. Target down, her spotter confirmed. Around her the team moved with practiced efficiency. Package secured. Exfiltration initiated. Mission complete. And as they moved through the darkness toward the extraction point, Sharma allowed herself one small moment of satisfaction. Not pride, not triumph, just the quiet knowledge that she'd done her job, had done it well, had proven once again that she belonged exactly where she was. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And in that action, in that unwavering commitment to excellence regardless of the obstacles placed in your path, there is a kind of power that no amount of mockery or prejudice or institutional resistance can diminish. She was proof of that, living proof, and she would continue to be for as long as she wore the uniform and carried the rifle and made the impossible shots that others said couldn't be made. Because that's what she did, that's who she was. And nothing, absolutely nothing, could take that away from her.